A very warm welcome to all of our panelists and audience. I am Aarushi Koundal and I am a senior correspondent with ETEnergyWorld. I primarily look after the renewable energy sector and the emerging technologies and quite a bit of energy transition also. So today we have a very esteemed panel to discuss a very important and interesting subject. The topic for this webinar is what is the right energy mix for India to reach net zero targets? And to speak on this topic, we have with us Mr. Snigdho Majumdar. He is the Executive Director, Engineers India Limited. Mr. Sanjeev Sinha, President, India Power Corporation Limited. We have Mr. Mohammad Sahil Ali. He is the Associate Director, South Asia, Power and Renewables at S&P Global. And Shantanu Srivastava, Sustainable Finance and Climate Risk Head at the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis. Thank you all for being a part of the panel. So, starting off the discussion, may I first request each one of you to kindly introduce yourselves and also share a opening remark on the broader topic that we have for today's webinar. So we can start off with Mr. Ali.
Great. Hello, everyone. Hello to my panelists and the audience. I'm Sahil. I'm with the Commodity Insights Division of S&P Global, and I focus on sustainable energy transition across South Asian markets, particularly in topics of critical net zero technologies, climate policy, carbon markets, and demand electrification. So I think the first thought that comes to mind when we talk about the right energy mix for India in the future is to assess the criteria that makes the energy mix the right one. So we conceptualize this as the energy trilemma, which is the simultaneous goal of achieving the broad sub-objectives of energy security, sustainability, and affordability. Now, why do we call it trilemma? Because the basket of energy options and the blueprint of technologies that we have, these involve choices which involve trade-offs and synergies. And these choices have to be very careful. And so over time, when we assess Indian policy landscape and its various submissions at global negotiations, we find that there is a clear hierarchy of objectives, which is centered around overarching energy security goal, which is the lens through which the policymaker would assess environmentally sustainable and affordable energy options. In today's context, fossil fuels make up about three-fourths of India's primary energy mix, with gas contributing about 5% of it, coal 45%, and the rest oil at 25%. And with all the talk about non-fossil, it's still limited in the energy sector to an overall for the primary energy mix around less than 10%. Whereas more than double of non-fossil fuel consumption actually comes from biomass and waste. And a lot of biomass and waste is currently concentrated in the non-commercial and essentially often rural sector. So in this larger context, if we look at India's net zero goals and all the interim incentives, targets, any efforts that are seeking to influence the future of the energy mix, we find that we have to understand these targets in terms of near-term signals that are being sent to market players to focus their energies in certain areas. So, ergo, we have the Indian government working overtime in international platforms to emphasize the significance of removing the existing barriers to trade, investment, and cooperation in ensuring secure, orderly, and sustainable clean energy pathways. And India has always emphasized a shared energy future, as we saw in the New Delhi edition of the G20 this year. But as a final point, I'd say that the developments in the Indian energy transition market, the whole energy landscape, they're happening at really fast at breakneck speed. So we hardly can catch a breath. And I'm sure we'll discuss many of these things going forward. But there are a lot of shocks and stressors to the emerging global macro political order, which we have only seen glimpses of. I mean, through the lockdowns, kinetic actions happening in various places, trade embargoes. And these will play out in a much more intensified manner in the future. I think there are very few people who are betting against it. And so, how the India's final energy mix and primary energy mix is shaped in, let's say, 10 or 15 years down the line, those conversations could be very different from what we have today as India develops and fine tunes and expands its energy transition strategies in the light of the changing world order. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ali. Those were some really good points to start off the discussion with. May I ask Mr. Majumdar to share his perspective?
Yeah, thank you, Aarushi. First of all, thanks ET Energy World for having me here and giving this opportunity to express our opinion on this very pertinent topic, energy transition. And energy transition itself has been used in so many forums and in so many ways nowadays that it sounds a little cliche. But the fact remains that this is the way forward. And how do we transition our energy? Because as we all know that the economy will grow only when the energy requirement increases and the energy projects, the mega projects delivering energy gets commissioned, and they in turn fuel the requirement of all other sectors, and all the sectoral growth together in a cumulative way pushes the economy forward, and it will probably take India out of the probable fear of recession that is there in hand. Now, as on today, standing where we are, we have a clear mandate on energy transition because our government has been very, very clear with its approach, with the Panchamrit Yojana that Narendra Modi has unveiled, our Honorable Prime Minister. We aspire to be carbon neutral by 2045 and net zero by 2070. Now, it itself is a Herculean task, and also we have to reduce our energy intensity by 45% by approximately 1 billion ton. And saying this is not easy because, as the energy basket was explained by Mr. Ali, that there is still over reliance on the fossil fuel, and the fact that no matter how much we wish that there is more and more electrification through green sources, and there are more and more green hydrogen and other clean and green energy coming and swapping its place with the existing dirty fuel, fossil fuel, that is not going to happen overnight. There has to be a long way forward because, just giving a small statistics, if you take the overall number of vehicles that fly all over the world, till 2 years back there was only 1% of them flying in electricity, and now that percentage has slightly gone up, but nowhere near to what it requires to completely replace the ICU engines. Now, the fact remains we aspire to have green and clean energy. We have mandate. We also have our policymakers which has framed certain guidelines. But then there has to be a transition, and the transition will happen through a gas economy. Gas being the natural gas being uh, the cleanest of all the fossil fuel, with negligible and zero SOx and NOx. And that is where we right now have to focus upon to see that we actually need to look at decarbonization of the existing energy processes that we have in hand, rather than aspiring for something which is not there to completely replace the fossil fuel, and also make the transition of gas economy so that our economy prospers. There is a better alternative for fossil fuels, and also to make our existing fossil fuels work in such a way that they are energy incentive and they are less harmful in their conversion process, so that eventually we are ready to step on to that next step where we look for clean and green energy. So there are wish lists, there are realities. We, the oil and gas professionals, always try to balance between the two. And obviously, we are very hopeful that India is a place where the entire oil and gas sector all over the world is looking into, because it is the most happening country with its ever increasing demand of refined and petroleum products and other energy per capita increase in requirement. So yes, of course, energy transition is something which I think we all will be very excited to talk about this evening.
Mr. Sinha, I would request you to kindly share your opening remarks.
Yes, thank you, Aarushi, and thank you, ETEworld, for inviting me. I'm Sanjeev Sinha. I lead the various technology and digital initiatives at India Power Corporation Limited. India Power is primarily a distribution company, which is also into generation. It's also into green energy, and gradually we are moving from the fossil power generation to more and more renewable energy. And also we have technology division because technology is the backbone of all the major changes which are happening in the country, which is the requirement of the new outlook of the various power industry. So as a utility company, or as we call it, as a discom, we basically procure power from various sources and distribute it to our consumers. So this energy mix is extremely important to us because since we get power from multiple sources, it is up to us whether we buy fossil power or we buy uh, renewable power, and it is always a matter of both that we do. And there's a mandate from the government that every discom has to adhere to certain percentage of renewable power to be distributed. Uh, and we have a mandate of around 18%, and uh, we are actually supplying far ahead of that, which is around 42% as of now. So our focus has been very strongly on the renewable power, and that is why the energy mix that we have supplying is always a mix of fossil and renewable power. Now, as we go along, as time passes, we expect our renewable power percentage to rise as high as possible. Maybe we should be crossing 50% mark in the next 1 year. And because of the focus that we have, also renewable power has emerged as a business vertical for us. So we are actually, expanding that business so that we are not only able to get that power, but also supply to other utilities, because almost all utilities are looking for ways to increase the renewable power in their energy mix. And that's the mandate, of course, but every utility has that objective there. Question is that how do they make it possible? And it has to be economically viable. It has to make a business sense. So the fossil power cost and the renewable power costs today are almost the same. So it's just a matter of choice. In fact, in many sectors, we have seen the renewable power cost dropping even below the fossil power cost, which makes it even more attractive for us or for other utilities to adopt renewable power and supply to the consumers. Even from the consumer end, there has been request saying that they have their own targets. And I'm talking about most of the HT customers or the commercial customers. They have their own internal targets where they need certain percentage of renewable power, and that percentage is something that we need to adhere. So we are even developing a system of measuring from the energy mix that how much is renewable power and how much of carbon emission they are saving by taking this energy mix from us. So these methodologies are being launched in the country, and this will help the consumers to measure them, not only get the energy mix, but even measure them, so that they know that they are adhering to not only their internal norms, but even for government norms. So I think we are moving in that direction, and we as a distribution company play an extremely important role. Very, very conscious on the energy mix, very conscious of the decarbonization processes that we are, and several steps are being taken in that direction. So we are right there on the ground, directly talking to consumers, then making sure that they get all the necessary benefits. At the same time, ensuring customer experience remains what it is, even better than what it is.
So I think you've mentioned some really good points to start off with. We'll discuss those further in the discussion. Mr. Srivastava, I would request you to kindly share your opening remarks on the topic.
Aarushi, thank you so much, first of all, ET, for having me over here. I think it's a very important topic, and
it's good that we try and reinforce, the importance of energy transition again and again through such platforms. Thank you so much for having me over here. Just a bit about IEFA before I give my opening remarks. IEFA is the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis. We are a global energy finance think tank. We are headquartered in the US, but we cover 34 markets globally. I'm part of the South Asia team, and I lead the sustainable finance and climate risk research as part of IFA South Asia. We do research on the policy, finance, and technology aspects of the energy markets, and our overarching aim is to accelerate the transition to a more diverse and profitable energy economy in whichever jurisdiction that we operate in. We've done a lot of work on highlighting the risk of stranded assets, stranded fossil fuel assets onto India's grid, the opportunities that gas brings in India's energy transition. We've also done a lot of work on highlighting the opportunities and issues related to circular economy when it comes to transition. One large financing where we've highlighted the policy and financial markets related regulations or interventions that are needed to grow the overall market for sustainable finance in the country. So in terms of the right energy mix for India, I think obviously I agree with all the other speakers that have come before me. It's definitely more and more RE going forward in the next couple of decades. But within RE also, I think if you look a bit deeper, we need to move. India has been a front runner in the adoption of grid scale solar onto its grid, right? It's among the emerging markets. We've been one of the champions of adopting this particular technology. But we've not been able to do much on other technologies, clean energy technologies. So be it offshore wind, onshore wind, DRE when it comes to solar, even pumped hydro, making sure that renewable energy is not intermittent through energy storage technologies. These are technologies which still need that push either from the regulation side or the market side for them to make commercial viability for investors and developers to come and invest in. We need to bridge that gap in the same way that we've been able to do it in grid scale solar. So I think going forward, the kind of policy tailwinds that have been provided to grid scale solar should also be appropriately provided to other technologies in the clean energy space, so that we have a balanced mix of RE technologies. So while we move away from fossil fuels, we also make sure that we're not just focusing on one specific technologies to fulfill our RE goals. Just to give an example, I talked about grid scale solar. While we've been champions of adoption of grid scale solar, we've not been able to do much on the rooftop solar side. Right? There's a lot of potential that has been pegged for rooftop solar in the country. We're just shy of close to 15 gigawatts of installed rooftop solar capacity in the country. Close to 70% of that comes from the CNI segment. Right. I think the recent push by the government, the PM Surya Ghar Yojana, I think that's a very important step in the direction of ensuring that we're able to exploit the potential of solar that each and every household rooftop in our country offers. Right. So that's one good step. Similarly, on the DRE segment, the Kusum scheme of the government, it's not been, I would say, been able to live up to its potential. But we have a lot of state-specific DRE schemes that have run really successfully in the country, and which could be sort of learning points for the central level Kusum scheme also to also recalibrate and see where are the gaps which need to be filled, what are the de-risking mechanisms that need to be introduced so that DRE or rural electrification when it comes to RE also picks up. So I'll stop there and happy to indulge deeper into this conversation.
So I think we should now dive deeper into the discussion. So when we speak of net zero, so let me ask Mr. Ali. So when it comes to the India's net zero targets, so what is the kind of stated and implied conditions and the assumptions that are related to the targets that have been set by India?
Fairly shortly, then I would say that my last context was basically giving you an idea of what the enabling conditions are, the implied conditions, that there has to be a smooth flow of technology and finance, through the north to the south and then south to the north. That's an essential element of clean tech cooperation and finance, without which some of the exotic and Star Trek options that we are actually thinking about or banking on, the critical net zero technologies such as EVs, CCS, green hydrogen, these will not be able to fulfill their potential without crowding in the investments and pooling investments, diversifying investments in all forms, and getting access to critical minerals to build these places, to build these technologies at home, rather than finally like importing the final products from abroad. So, and this is essentially through the lens of energy security, which I broadly spoke about. I actually wanted to dive more into the conversation that we've just had, and explore the issue from the demand side, because whenever we think of energy transition, we think of certain set supply side options and how we can increase or decrease these. But there's a lot of I think there's a lot of disambiguation that is required on the demand side to be able to understand what choices really fit our needs. So if we just start with the hard to abate sectors, we call it sport and industry hard to abate. I would put power in the same bracket because of the various arguments our esteemed experts have already given. And these are hard to abate because beyond efficiency gains, non-fossil solutions for essentially combustion-based systems, such as in industry or in transport, right? Mobile combustion systems, they are difficult to replace with non-fossil sources. So the following from what Shantanu also mentioned, electrification of demands, because all the renewables and the hydro and the nuclear is all basically focused on it, on the power sector. And then through the power sector also emerges the aspect of green hydrogen. So we have to understand that, like with electrification of demands, where government of India is taking major strides, we are still at about 20% today, 20 to 22% today in terms of the overall energy supply, and how much electricity needs that, despite so much work. And we need to be able to, for any conceptualization of net zero, be easily above 50%, maybe 60 to 65 to 70% by 2050, to be able to think about net zero by 2070 in the first place. Also, that electrification of demands also leads to efficiency gains vis-a-vis using fossil fuels across different end users. So from cooking to steel making to transport, some of course some options are easier to implement than the others, but there's a lot of work that is actually going on in order to facilitate some of these transitions. We have work going on in the EV sector, and so on and so forth. Electric cooking, electrification, intensification of electrification. Now, well, I mentioned how much we need to be in terms of electrification of end users, but what about the efficiency of power system? So today, if we see our power system efficiency, we are again not at the level we would want to be in terms of the T&D losses and the generation losses in case of fossil fuels. Some of this will actually improve with more non-fossil penetration. By 2050, we expect that 4/5 of all capacity added will be non-fossil. 3/4 of the non-fossil will be actually solar. And then if we go deeper, then we find that T&D investments and infrastructure related upgradation, better evacuation capacity will not lead to more renewable penetration, but also reduction in system losses. So again, our efficiency would improve by at least double to cross 50% in the electricity sector as well. Now, the question that many of us have touched upon is that how much of this energy in the electricity sector is going to come from dedicated non-emitting sources, such as RE or non-fossil. And a lot of these demands will need their dedicated sources of supply either on site or somewhere else. We have the AI revolution coming up, the data centers, for which will require constant and continuous supply, for which now many countries led by the US are now talking about private nuclear investments, small modular reactors, as being one way to supply that continuous and quality and reliable power. But on the other hand, you also have aspects such as EVs, which require very little electricity, but they lead to huge spike in power demand. So over time, how do you manage higher and higher levels of EV integration as you are planning without disrupting the grid completely? Obviously, you will need to allocate assets separately outside the grid for these. Then the natural question arises, what happens to the discoms? Because conventionally we've seen, Shantanu also mentioned, RTPV is not progressing as fast, and there are these various, again, harping back on the trade-offs. There are trade-offs when discoms lose their paying customers. That is undeniable. So what kind of frameworks can we evolve to facilitate the smooth transition of discoms into a new clean energy future? And then finally, if we just talk about the grid, then our analysis at least shows that it's very hard to push a coal below 20% generation capacity. It is enormous work to get from 20% to 50%, 15%, let alone to 0%. So in this context, CCS becomes a very important option for which a robust carbon pricing regime is needed. So what we are finding is that one thing is leading to another in order to evolve the framework for the future high renewable, low carbon, low fossil energy mix, and work is going in all of these domains. But my contention has always been that this work is happening mostly from a supply side perspective and an investor perspective, where it's easier to aggregate investments. But major electrification of this kind requires a deep, or even switch to green hydrogen, let's say, requires a massive mass scale technological leapfrogging, which across end user categories, which is much harder to achieve than supply side transformations, where a lot of efforts are concentrated. So we take green hydrogen for an instance, and this will be my last point. We talk about green hydrogen in terms of replacing the combustion requirements from industry and transport, in particular the hard to abate sector, as well as feedstock requirements, for which electricity obviously can't fulfill the purpose. So the whole green hydrogen ecosystem today not only faces questions, hard questions related to techno-economics, supply chain, and global regulation, all of which are being worked on. But there is also on the side, and work on this is just beginning in the Indian context, there is a gaping challenge of building the enabling infrastructure, storage, and logistics networks, to export, to transfer seamlessly between different hydrogen consumption and production centers, and so on and so forth. And also there is a gap of reliable and cost-effective end-user solutions required for scaling. And this is very important because essentially what we are talking about is replacing one set of infrastructure and a system of manufacturing and production with a completely different set, much more complex, many more moving parts, not very simple, not as straightforward as just going and installing a module somewhere and it will generate electricity. Not an elegant solution. There are a lot of moving parts. And therefore, I think if you're talking about deep decarbonization, that's where the challenge is going to lie, maybe 20 15 years down the line. So our investments have to be planned in order to kind of push the demand sectors as well. There are sporadic efforts happening with lifestyle for environment, again focused on the rural sector in organizing the value chain and supply chain, which will obviously be helpful for biomass penetration. But also, if we think just biomass for a second, then you will find that beyond certain percentage of blending, which we always promise we're going to reach very soon, beyond certain levels of blending, you will fundamentally need to change, your combustion systems to be able to account for different chemical characteristics of the blended fuel. And these are questions that will become important down the line. But I just wanted to leave a teaser right now for us to start thinking about beyond supply, what are the things we need to focus on. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Yeah. I think cost is a major implication when it comes to green hydrogen or carbon capture technologies. Yeah. So moving on, Mr. Majumdar, as we were just discussing about the energy mix. So what are the kind of business strategies that what is your perspective on that that we need to adopt for the future energy mix, which would have different roles for oil, gas, and renewables.
I was listening to the panelist and their deep dive on the RE, specifically the solar and the potentials and the challenges thereof. But what I would like to talk about with regard to the business strategy for energy transition is that this is a win-win approach for all the feedstocks. Let it be solar, let it be wind, let it be green hydrogen, let it be electrification through greener sources, and let it be the conventional fossil fuel. Why I am saying that is because of the fact that the requirement of the country and the demand, the way it is increasing, we are far from accommodating that demand with respect to the available feedstocks. For example, in our refining capacity, right now we are a little over 250 mmtpa in our production, and by 2040 we aspire to be over 400 mmtpa. Similarly, my gas utilization, if we really want to usher into a gas economy, my in the energy basket, the penetration of gas usage should be from 5.5 to 6% to 15% by 2030. Now, these are very tall asks. At present, now we need to. I just need to tell you at this point of time that over the last 60 years, my organization, Engineers India, had been the architect for oil and gas development in India. Was involved in almost all the refineries and petrochemical projects. And to increase by 150 mmtpa in 15 years, that is a Herculean task. Presently, IL is working only about 28 mmtpa projects, 3 new refineries belonging to CPCL, IOCL, and HPCL. And there are other planned projects which are put on hold. And what is the exact scenario where we all will be very happy, including the policymakers, including the executors of the project, including the stakeholders. We would all like to see that there is more and more penetration of electrification and green hydrogen into the mobility and power sector. Obviously, and this will actually do something else. What it will do is it will drive the feedstock of fossil fuel like naphtha and natural gas to the petrochemical sector, and it will usher in a growth of petrochemicals, wherein my requirement of C2, C3 actually will be over 40 mmtpa in another 10 years. That would be a kind of a win-win scenario. And to reach this end goal, we need to use the interim fossil fuel that I talked about, the interim transition fuel, which is natural gas. If we keep this simple, if we look into this in a way that they perform their respective role, overall our requirement with regard to the aspiration of clean energy vis-a-vis the present day requirement of refined products as well as petrochemical products will be met, because we need to keep in mind the numbers also, that while the per capita petrochemical use globally is 37 kg and in developed countries it is over 50 kg, in India we still have it around 17-18 kg. So there is an enormous potential. There is a market, we are unable to cater to the market. And as I said, that if India has to actually go to that road to development with economic growth more than 8%, then there has to be more and more energy projects, new energy projects, which have to get unveiled, which in turn will bring in the other projects in all other sectors. So our approach should not be isolated to any particular feedstock or any particular type of energy, but it has to be integrated with the existing and the proposed. Because just giving an example, the National Green Hydrogen Mission has given a mandate now that for all new refineries, there has to be a green hydrogen plant set up. Now, you are just now talking about the cost aspect. And green hydrogen, if we look at the generation of green hydrogen, that is about $5 to $6. Vis-a-vis the gray hydrogen that we prepare, that we make in the refineries through methane reformer, which is pegged at around $1.5 to $2. And even if that gray hydrogen, we do take care of the emitted carbon dioxide by CCUS, the resultant blue hydrogen will also be a little above $2. So there is a cost parity which has to be looked into before we say that, okay, no, we are only going to use green hydrogen, because we have to keep it in mind that this is end of the day a marketplace. The market will have its own inertia. People come here to do business, make profit and get money. The market will have its own inertia to reject or accept a particular feedstock. Policies are made in a way so that the marketplace has the projects executed in a much better way towards a desired goal. So in my opinion, the approach broadly will have to be that we need to have more and more solar. We need to have more and more the power sector having more and more thermal and power plants using gas, natural gas, which itself is a challenge. Otherwise, we will never be able to reduce the carbon footprint to the extent that we want to. And until and unless we achieve this, it will be very difficult to reduce the carbon intensity by 45% that has been managed. The usage of coal, since we have 45% of coal in our energy basket, we need to use coal in a different way altogether, probably in a cleaner way like coal gasification, and use the syngas that comes out of it, and let that achieve the desired product range. But the fact remains, as on today, we are not in a position to reject any feedstock. We are not in a position to say that no, we are going to adopt only the green and clean energy. Gone are the days of fossil fuel. It's not like that. Fossil fuel is going to stay with us probably for another 10 years. And the day they will not be the preferred choice, those fossil fuel will become the wonderful feedstock to create the petrochemical products that have increased our lives, and we are so much dependent on those products, the petrochemical products. And of course, the use of natural gas, the infrastructure, and the penetration of natural gas in each and every sector, and the ability of the sector to pay for the increased price of the natural gas vis-a-vis the existing fossil fuel, that would actually determine how quickly we will usher ourselves into that next stage of clean and green energy. So that is what the business strategy I think about on behalf of my organization.
Mr. Sinha, I'd like to rope you in the conversation. So, from the perspective of the utility, so how can technology play a key role in reaching the net zero targets? Technology specifically in the utilities segment.
Yeah, so technology in the utility sector is actually very important. Plays a vital role in achieving this goal because it is the enabler for ensuring cleaner energy production, whether we are talking about optimization of resource management or even for that matter, reduction of emissions. Let's take some examples. For example, Many of the grids, and we are a utility company, many of the grids are being converted into smart grids. So this smart grids means we are putting various sensors into it, ensuring that the data is captured, and then we use that data for better efficiency here. So what it means is that gives us a real-time monitoring and demand management. And this better integration of the renewable power into this demand and real-time monitoring, uh, this reduces the reliance on the fossil fuel because we are able to actually take more and more renewable power onto this. Also, since many of the homes are now switching over to rooftop solar panels, as Shantanu had mentioned, there actually many of the states are going fairly fast on some of the solar panel schemes, few states at least, and they are actually converting their resources to a distributed energy resource, which means they are consumers, but they are also producers. So they have rooftop solar, and many of them even have energy storage. So they have converted themselves into a distributed energy resource. So to use these resources for betterment and for providing more stable power, that is where the technology comes in again. And also, when we talk about renewable energy power, the distribution company also face this issue of renewable energy integration. So this is very important because without the appropriate integration of these energy sources into the grid, the benefits will not accrue. So, and by the nature of the renewable power, we know that there is a high dependence on solar and wind. And we know that these things are not available the entire day. So there is a requirement of use of various data analytics and predictive algorithm to understand what the energy demand and supply will be from these intermittent sources. And also we need storage systems to back them up because these are not continuous power sources, they are intermittent power sources. So technology becomes the enabler to ensure that the right demand and right supply comes, and also the appropriate energy source is available to support this kind of system. So this is what is important where technology comes in, and the renewable power sources are integrated here. Also, if we talk about the various kind of energy efficiencies, for example, if we are putting sensors into various places, we are able to actually understand the inefficiencies in the system and trying to eliminate them. Also, this kind of losses, if we are able to eliminate and bring in the efficiency, that also reduces the usage of the fossil power. And with the renewable energy integration, we are able to take in more of the renewable energy there. So these are the technology areas where it plays extremely important role for the renewable energy adoption by the distribution companies. And as I earlier mentioned, that once we are able to give this kind of energy mix to the consumers, we also ensure that we give them some kind of measurement of the carbon footprint which they have saved by taking this energy mix from us, and how much of carbon footprint they have been able to reduction in carbon footprint that they have been able to contribute. So these are some of the areas. Also, some of the local power generation areas, microgrids is also coming in a big way gradually, though. It's coming up. It's in a localized renewable energy production. And they are another, dependence on renewable power, and renewable power is coming up in a big way in these areas, wherever microgrids are getting accepted here. So these are some of the areas. Also, the country is moving heavily into electric vehicles. So electrical vehicles, the higher adoption of EV is, the lower fossil power will be used on the roads, right? So so that's another area, and we as a utility company feel that we have a role to play in the higher adoption of the EVs in the country, and therefore various schemes by various utility companies are on to ensure that the EV adoption is, the pace of that is quickened. They become faster, and this actually helps here. Okay, so and in the long run, what we also foresee is that EV can actually store excess energy, and they can actually feed it back to the grid during high demand periods. So that's another area where the EV can actually play an important role. So many areas that we see that the technology is going to be an enabler to ensure higher adoption of renewable energy. And I see as we go along that more and more utility companies are going to take up uh, these methods in to ensure higher adoption there. Also, newer concepts like virtual power plants, which is software-based kind of things, peer-to-peer trading, all these concepts are also gradually coming in. They are also going to be launched very soon. I see some of them getting launched in the next few months. So I think these will also play an extremely important role in removing the intermittency of the renewable power. And that will allow even renewable power to provide a very stable power to the consumers. And with that, the dependence on fossil power will drop even further.
I would also like to touch upon the ESG aspect. So, Shantanu, just as important as when it comes to net zero, just as important as energy mix is or renewables is, equally ESG holds the same amount of importance. So, when it comes to ESG investments, what is the kind of scope that you see in India's renewable energy sector?
So, Aarushi, when you talk about ESG investments, one thing that we need to be clear about is that there are virtually no ESG investors based out of India, right? So we are actually talking about investments coming from offshore markets into clean energy infrastructure in India, right? So I think that we need to be clear about that first. Now, when you talk about ESG investments coming from offshore markets, historically, if you look at the past 10 to 12 years, India has been a pretty attractive market for RE investments for global pension funds, investment managers, insurance companies, sovereign wealth funds. So a bunch of different set of institutional and non-institutional investors have been investing into clean energy infrastructure in India over the last more than a decade now, right? And if you just try to break down the ESG investments into different buckets, so you could have a equity and a debt investment. Within equity, you could have private equity, you could have public equity, and within debt, you could have offshore bonds and loans, and onshore bonds and loans. All these four categories, four broad categories, have actually found interest from global investors, right? Particularly the the green bond market, which is the offshore bond market. First, maybe I can just talk about the private equity market, right? So since 2010, 2012, when the first set of clean energy IPP started propping up in India, we've seen several global investors coming in and putting large amount of equity, primary equity into these companies, even when debt was not available, right? No commercial bank in India was ready to provide capital to any of these companies at that point in time, because of the policy related tailwinds that I talked about in my opening remarks. There was a lot of attractiveness related to clean energy infrastructure in India. That is why you saw a lot of institutional investors, global institutional investors coming in, even when Indian investors and capital providers did not have confidence on this asset class. That scenario has changed now. So in the past couple of, I would say, quarters, we've seen the likes of PFC, Areda, even SBI coming up and providing a lot of capital, committing a lot of capital to clean energy infrastructure in India. And that is because the investments that was garnered through the initial risk capital provided by global institutional investors, that has de-risked these investments, right? That has created that learning and demonstration effects within the Indian ecosystem also, right? So I would say from a global investor perspective, ESG, and specifically talking about RE, right? Because RE is, I think the whole Indian energy transition story revolves around grid scale RE. So India has been a very attractive sort of a market, right? Now, talking about the bond market, specifically the green bond market, globally among the emerging markets, India has been one of the largest issuer of green bonds across the globe, right? And this has been since 2015. We've seen this trend, and majority of this capital has actually been used to refinance existing renewable energy projects, right? Which means that there is a maturity that is developed within Indian corporates and Indian IPPs which are putting up clean energy infrastructure, that once you've put in your own equity, once you've used bank financing lines to set up a clean energy infrastructure, you can go out in the global markets, issue a green bond, refinance that initial capital that you put, and then use it to finance your pipeline. So that maturity is there. And given the fact that India has been one of the largest issuers of green bond, also shows that, and again, going back to my first point, that majority of ESG, 90%, more than 90% of green bonds coming out of India have been subscribed by global investors, global ESG investors. So that actually shows that there is confidence within global investor communities on the ESG opportunities, ESG investment opportunities propping up in the renewable energy sector in India. Right. So again, both equity side and debt side, and the similar story panned out in the public equity side also. There is just to quote one example. Recently, Shell, which has a platform company, Spring Energy, that it bought from Actis in 2022, that has been put on sale, I think, just recently in February of 2024, and this is a financial investor that Actis was a financial investor which invested into operational RE asset, recycled that capital, sold it to a strategic investor, that is Shell, and then Shell again is recycling that capital in that operational portfolio, selling part stake in it to other financial and strategic investors. So ArcelorMittal and CPPIB are two front runners in that. So that shows the maturity of the ESG investment landscape in India, right? And there is I think there is a lot of competition in buying that particular sort of assets that are out for sale from that portfolio. So yes, I think the ESG investments in India in the RE sector are very attractive, and that's a growing market again because the confidence of global investors are increasing in this particular sector. But that said, what we've also witnessed, and we have teams working in Europe and US also on ESG investment. What we've seen globally is that there is a shifting trend when you talk about ESG investments, where let's say there is a utility, right, which is transitioning away from fossil fuels, it's diversifying its business model. Earlier, it was good enough for them to have a net zero target in place, a 2035, 2040, 2045 target in place, and they could be showing that we're putting in, let's say, a 500 megawatt, 1 gigawatt of renewable energy every year. And investors are happy, everyone was happy, the government was happy, shareholders are happy. But today what is happening, especially with global investors, is that they're not just satisfied enough with you doing something towards renewable energy. If you have a net zero target in place, you need to link your actions today in the short and medium terms on how they contribute towards achievement of your longer term goals, right? So you need a corporate transition plan in place. And that's where since the early part of 2023, what we've seen is that across the world, regulations by financial sector regulators are incorporating transition plan disclosure requirements by the regulated entities, right? The corporates. And this is not just limited to the energy sector, also to the hard-to-abate sector that Mr. Ali was talking about. So for Indian companies to now continue to leverage on the growing pool of ESG capital that is available again in the global markets, it is essential that they develop robust corporate transition plan disclosure practices so that with the evolving ecosystem, ESG ecosystem globally, we're able to match up with because the pool of capital does not see borders, right? If there is an opportunity available in the European market, that pool of capital will go into that particular market, right? If the same opportunity is available in India and you're providing disclosures, credible disclosure on transition plans, the same pool of capital then can come into India also, right? So you're competing with that global pool of capital and with utilities across the globe, right? So you need to match up with the developments happening in the developed markets also. And similar is the case for the equity investments also. Similarly for bond investments, and I'm just limiting my sort of commentary to the RE sector. There is a whole different challenge when you talk about hard-to-abate sectors, which need to be really tackled. But yes, I mean, at the very least, robust corporate transition planning is required right now. So I'll stop there.
Right. Mr. Ali, we were talking about the energy mix previously. So I have two questions for you. Firstly, what is the quantitative and qualitative nature of the emerging energy demand, and what is the kind of impact that you see it has on the energy mix? Secondly, regarding the policy side of things, what are the success factors when it comes to setting up a stable and resilient, net zero transition journey?
So some of the aspects of energy demand I just answered in the previous, I think, round, where I did mention that demand would play a central role in shaping what kind of supply it is able to absorb. Right, so you need a swift moving of infrastructure, even on the demand side, to match up with the scale of innovations happening on the supply side. It is much easier to affect the transformation in the electricity sector that is moving from fossil fuel consumption to electricity consumption across many of the uses. It is more difficult and challenging when we talk about replacing the entrenched fossil fuels within the industry and transport sectors. Replacing it with gas only perhaps halves the emissions, but what about the other half? So green hydrogen, like we briefly spoke about, kind of is being experimented, but like our expert clearly mentioned, that it's still about 3 times more expensive, and even more when you consider cost of delivery compared to gray and blue hydrogen. So that I think that aspect needs to be fully played out. But in terms of the final messages for the Indian policy and some of the actions that are being taken, I would say that if we are committing to net zero, then we should know that we should be peaking our fossil fuel consumption by about 2035, 2040 timeframe. That clearly is not on the horizon, unless there's a big black swan events that kind of cripples demand or reduces demand, which none of us want to happen. We want to see a robust growing economy. So, in a sense, we've already made a decision there, and we've communicated that decision as much in global platforms that to talk about complete fossil phase out is not on the cards. Even talking about peaking fossil fuels is not on the cards as of now. We don't foresee it unless something drastic, like I mentioned, some Star Trek technologies actually take root and start growing rapidly, much more than we've seen. But these have their own gestation lags and periods of development and reconsideration, which we need to watch out for. But logically, this extends to the fact that now we need CCS in the system at some point of time in the future. We've had some baby steps on CCS already being undertaken, very innovative pilots. But we need to understand that the scale that we require these technologies is going to be enormous. So what we need is, for an all of the above approach that we are proposing, we need a robust domestic framework for system level thinking and different actions that have to be nurtured in order to move ourselves towards that direction. And just picking up from what Shantanu said, of course, for finance, diversification and pooling are the key for a sustained inflow of capital required to make these massive shifts. But also, one of the aspects I briefly touched upon, which is an enabling framework in form of a domestic carbon market. I'd just like to spend like a couple of minutes just talking about that, because that really helps shape the demand and the supply side, both in a way that is to affect faster clean energy penetration and fuel shift. But that has to be done with minimal disruptions of economic activity, and making sure that market power and market outcomes are not skewed. So traditionally, what we find that some of these companies, especially those that are committing to SBI targets and so on and so forth, they are very forward looking. They have the first mover advantage, and they are likely to have a larger say in how the cleaner energy futures are going to shape up. But given the way our jobs are distributed and how our economic activities are distributed, we have to ensure that much of this technological breakthroughs also penetrate to some of these sectors, so that there is learning across the board, and also in fulfillment of India's and global leave no one behind agenda. And this would really help. This would really help in entrenching the political movement for net zero clean energy transition. Because at the end of the day, what we are seeing across in more advanced nations is some kind of, emerging voices of resistance that the transition might be happening too fast in certain cases. We have the case of automakers from Germany complaining about the cheaper Chinese imports that are on the verge of wiping the industry. We have a situation where, a disruption in gas supply globally led to an increased reliance on coal, in particularly the same economy, Germany. And then you have, a high share of rooftop PV penetration, and all of these things have led to certain issues that we now see in certain markets, such as the mismatch in peak and non-peak power prices, which a country of our nature and our diversity can ill afford. So we need to be putting those systems in place to ensure a stable and equitable future, and that all of our objectives on energy trilemma, be it sustainability, energy security, and affordability, they are satisfied at least the minimum required level, in order to, again, avoid skewed outcomes. So I'll leave it at that.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Majumdar, when it comes to setting up a policy framework, so what is your perspective on the kind of framework that should be in place in order to achieve inclusive and a sustainable energy mix?
The policies do have a pertinent role in forward, but in India and in elsewhere also, what we have seen is the person who actually is a stakeholder in a project not necessarily make a policy, and the policy maker who creates the policy probably never be on design board or at field to execute the project. But however, policy can be looked at our wish list, and as I have said earlier, that all the feedstock has to coexist for the time being, because there is a huge demand as far as our own country is concerned, and there is a place for everything. Policies only smoothen out the objectives that you want to achieve in a near frame or a medium term frame. In this particular case, what I need to talk about is. Uh, One by one, I'll come to all the sectors of this energy transitions. If we start with the refinery sector, the refining sector, as I have said, there is going to be a gigantic increase in capacity in 5 or 10 years, and that is propelled by the demand of the market. So the focus, in order to bring down the carbon intensity and in order to be on the path of clean energy, should be to encourage more and more energy efficient processes, to focus on decarbonization as well as to increase the energy efficiency, and use demand substitution by using alternate biofuels and drop-in fuels. And having said that, biofuels have a much lesser yield than the conventional fossil fuel. So this is where the question of viability of the projects come, and this is where the policy can step in and actually can make a project which is otherwise not feasible and make them happen. And this in long term will actually reduce carbon footprint and help in the cause of the energy transition. Similarly, we have to also look into the processes, look into more and more bottom of barrel process, wherein we refine the heavy residues and create syngas and create gasification, which is a cleaner source of making our desired product. And these are not conventional, and because they are not conventional, they cost more. And the policy should support this kind of conversions. In the same way, when my desired objective of mobility sector and household electrification is being achieved through the cleaner and greener energy, then the feedstocks, the fossil fuel feedstocks, when they are shifted to petrochemicals, then we also have to look into more and more involvement of the MSMEs. Without the MSMEs in place, you cannot really propel the economy. And there you need to have policies like productivity linked incentives. There has to be anti-dumping of inferior plastics from outside the country. There are certain policies existing as on today. For example, requirements between Singapore and India that suggests import of LDP at 0% tax. Whereas if I import naphtha, I have to pay 2.5% tax. So this again is an example of a detrimental policy wherein I am actually trying to put tax on the import of feedstock, but I am ready to bring in the desired product from outside at a 0% tax. This is never going to help in creating the marketplace that we want to for increase of our consumption. Rather, the other way around has to happen. It is the overall perspective that has to be seen, that what should be my immediate target 2 years down the line, 5 years down the line. Whenever we talk of energy transition, we are always very comfortable in talking about 2035 and 2040 because we know that is a long way ahead and the margin of errors are acceptable. But let us create the step forward in achievable steps and then see to it that how far we have progressed. And this is where the policies actually makes it much easier. Thank you.
Mr. Sinha, so my next question is to you. So when it comes to reaching the net zero goal, what more needs to be done according to you from the perspective of a power utility?
Yeah, I think the technology adoption has played an extremely important role in moving towards a net zero goal. While we adopt more and more renewable energy, the various technology aspects has played an important role in facilitating this. Going forward, I think the pace of the technology adoption will also play an extremely important role in the way we move towards this goal of net zero here. So, technology, as we all know, is not constant; it's changing, and technology adoption has started. But I think the technology adoption plus the type of technology will also change as time passes by. For example, let's say the storage batteries, which typically had been with the lithium-ion batteries, will then migrate to more efficient solid-state batteries, and many batteries of that kind of. Also, there are newer technologies like a thermal energy storage system, which uses the steam emitted from the thermal plants to store energy. That has also come into the country. So that will also play an extremely important role in enhancing the storage capacity. For renewable power to be used, the storage capacity has to be upgraded to the best possible. And that's what is very important here because of the intermittency of renewable power. So renewable power can only be adopted if the storage is appropriately supporting it. So that's why, along with the sources, the storage also needs to be upgraded. And that's what the country is already moving around. We have seen quite a few changes starting to happen, and I think the space of these changes will play an important role, even in transmission for that matter. I see some of the utilities have tested out superconductor transmission lines, which will actually also facilitate the transmission of renewable power from long distance. So these are some of the changes. Some newer concepts like virtual power plants will play an important role because many consumers are moving and becoming distributed energy resources, which means they have rooftop solar, they have batteries at home, or they may have EV with them. They're all sources of power, and at peak time, every such source of power will contribute. So this will also help with the use of these technologies. So when virtual power plants come, the DRs will be used completely. The newer concepts like peer-to-peer trading, where all the people who have spare power available can be able to transmit to the people who need the power at that time, and in a decentralized way. This will also facilitate how renewable power adoption will be possible. So these are some of the examples in which we see as technology goes by, as as we have more and more technology and more higher adoption of these technology, we see higher adoption of these of renewable power. I think they all will contribute to the net zero here because the energy mix, as we know today, will gradually change. If we still have a majority coming from fossil power, I think, another few years, and we are hopeful that this will become a minority. The majority will actually come from renewable sources, thanks to the technological changes which are happening, and thanks to the adoption of the technology which is happening.
Shantanu, I would like you to quickly, because we are short of time, so quickly just touch upon two aspects related to ESG. So, what are the kind of challenges, if you could point out just two to three key challenges that are there in ESG finance, and what more needs to be done from the policy side of things?
It would be difficult to summarize everything in 2 to 3 minutes, but I think I'll just go back to when you talk about ESG investments for any investor, the first thing is return generation, right? So if there is de-risking happening of clean energy infrastructure assets in the country, like we've seen for grid scale solar, right? With 25-year PPAs, must-run status, ISAs waiver, all of these, they've helped de-risk these assets. So that's the first thing, right? And then you go for green or non-green, right? Transition planning, all of these things. So it's absolutely important for the new set of clean energy infrastructure assets to also have similar de-risking coming from a policy side, right? And some of that we've seen. So PLI is one such intervention that we've seen. It has been successful in some, it's not been much successful in the others. So I think that really needs to be recalibrated. The policy tailwinds or the policy incentives that de-risk clean energy infrastructure investments. Then coming from a financial market perspective, I'll just pick up one challenge that I just highlighted, the lack of corporate transition planning practices and disclosures. From a regulatory perspective, like I mentioned, the ISSB, the International Sustainability Standards Board, which is of the IFRS Foundation, 20 different jurisdictions globally have adopted them. The ISSB has an explicit requirement for disclosure of corporate transition plans. It is also assumed responsibility of handling the disclosure-related aspects of the transition plan task force, which is the gold standard in transition plan disclosures globally, right? So, long story short, there is a global sort of push towards, from a regulatory push towards disclosure of corporate transition plans. In India, we don't have that as part of the BRSR. SEBI's BRSR standards, even though there is some sort of overlap between BRSR standards and what would be recognized as a robust corporate transition planning exercise, but it's all fragmented. So I think one regulatory ask should be that at least a guidance comes from the SEBI's end for corporates to then start planning or start considering corporate transition planning as an important aspect of their overall corporate strategy, and that should definitely be followed up by a regulation. So I think that covers it in 2 minutes or under that. Thank you so much.
As I mentioned, we are short of time. So I think we are headed to the end of our conversation. I would request each one of you to quickly share a closing comment on where we are headed in this journey as a country and what lies ahead for India. So, Mr. Sinha, you can give your comment.
Sure. We are headed in the right direction with the various policies and various technologies in place. However, there is a need to quicken the space right now. For example, country is already implementing 250 million smart meters. They will all contribute to this. The need is to quicken the space. Also, the adoption of the various technology areas we have seen has been a bit slow. So even that, if it becomes faster, the higher adoption we can go, the faster we can reach on the goal of becoming net zero here. So while there are so many other parameters also important to ensure this, but my focus as a technologist, my focus has been to provide the right technology to become the right enabler. We always see that as an enabler, not a driver. The driver will be the capacity which gets generated, but technology will be the enabler to make this possible.
It all boils down to the three aspects of availability, accessibility, and affordability for the fuels that are existing. And for the areas where we require more technology-related upgradation, it is all about innovation. How quickly we are being able to bring in innovations in the field of CSP, in the field of electrification, that will actually decide upon the pace of energy transition. And we are going in the right direction with all the necessary fillps. everybody is working hand in hand, and I'm so glad to hear from other experts about the comments that they had with regard to REs, and this no doubt is our future. We have to leave the planet as we have come to this planet some time back, and this is our commitment, and now it is a compulsion. This is no longer a choice.
We are accelerating our transition, no doubt. So, in a sense, we can say we are headed in the right direction. My message would be to not be too much focused on the exact numbers and the targets. So, for example, 500 gigawatt of renewables by 2030 would require about 40 to 45 to 50% gigawatt additions annually and in the grid, and the best we can manage at for now is 20, which is exactly half or less. So I guess the directionality is more important than the eventual outcome. What we should focus on is that the number of changes that are happening, they are of course favorable to one section of the industry and not so favorable to the other. We've already heard about the participants on several of those aspects. I would advise the government not to pick winners and losers, but let the market decide, and may the best solution win.
So I'll probably pick up the perspective of finance, because I think in a lot of debates it's said that do we have the available finance to reach our, or fulfill our RE ambitions and reach the 2050 2070 goals. So I think finance is there, right? It's not a problem of whether capital will be available or not. It's the problem of whether do you have investable opportunities that match investor appetites to then channel that capital into RE infrastructure assets in the country. So we've done that in the past with grid scale solar, and with the new set of RE technologies, be it green hydrogen, be it battery storage, be it offshore wind. I think if we replicate the same set of policy incentives and tailwinds, we will definitely be able to attract capital. And there is capital in trillions that is available, right? I always try to look at the brighter picture. There is capital available in trillions. It's just waiting for the right set of opportunities to come and invest in. If India is able to provide those opportunities, we will be able to attract all that capital that is today wanting to align itself with low carbon technologies and investments globally.
Thank you so much. It was a very interesting interaction. I think we have covered a lot of topics from the global and domestic standpoint, ranging from green hydrogen to the technology side of things, the perspectives on import tax, and also the kind of challenges that are there when it comes to financing ESG, getting the finance into India. So thank you so much to all of you for joining the conversation and being part of ET Energy. Thank you.